I pass the same building every morning on my way to work. It's not exactly out of the way. I live in a neighborhood where everything's pressed close together, and the city's skeleton sticks out in places. You walk the same routes not out of convenience, but because they're all you've got. This building, though, this old brick thing on Kelm Street, always makes me glance up, even if it's just for a second. Maybe because it's different. Tired in a way that nothing else around it is. 5 stories tall, with soot-gray walls that once might have been red, and windows rimmed with rusting metal. The front doors are bolted shut with chains. One of those old dorm-style places, probably built in the 60s or 70s, when quick concrete and bare bones was enough for housing. No one's lived there in years, far as I know. The city posted a condemned sign years ago. Faded now, but still clinging to the front gate like it's part of the place. I always figured they were just waiting to tear it down. This morning, like every other, I had my coffee in one hand, earbuds in, coat zipped up to my chin. Same playlist. Same time of day. That pale morning light where everything looks a little washed out, a little underwater. I was walking past the building, not even looking at it this time, just letting the rhythm of steps and music pull me forward, when something made me pause. I couldn't say what it was at first. Just a flicker of movement. So I looked up. The windows are mostly filthy, caked with grime and old weather. Most are dark. A few have curtains still hanging inside, rotted things that barely move even when it's windy. But one of the top windows, the one on the 5th floor, left side, had something behind it. I squinted, took out one earbud. There was a shape there. Faint. A person, I thought. Maybe a man? Standing perfectly still. I couldn't make out features. Not really. It was like trying to see through fogged glass. But the silhouette was definitely human. My first thought? Maintenance. Maybe someone was inside doing repairs, checking something. I knew the city kept inspectors around for buildings like this, even the ones that were sealed up. But that seemed strange, since there were no vans or trucks outside, and the chain on the front door hadn't been touched. Still, I didn't think too much of it. People work strange hours. Maybe someone had a key. Maybe it was just a shadow behind the glass. A trick of light. I looked for a few seconds more, sipped my coffee, and moved on. Didn't feel weird at the time. Just one of those passing moments that sticks for no good reason. It was only later, when I passed the building again the next day, that I saw it was still there. Still standing. Still watching. I didn't remember it right away. The next morning was colder, thin frost on the grass, my breath fogging the air as I walked. I was running a little late, the kind of late that makes you skip breakfast and not realize you're hungry until your stomach growls halfway down the block. I had a scarf wrapped around the lower half of my face, half listening to a podcast I didn't even care about. And I would have walked straight past the building again, like always, if something in my peripheral vision hadn't tugged at me. That flicker again. That sense of being noticed, even before I noticed anything. So I stopped. Turned. And there it was. 5th floor, left window. The figure. Same as before. Not moving. Not waving. Just there, behind the glass. It looked a little clearer this time, though. I couldn't tell if that was because the window had been wiped, or because my brain was starting to focus better on it. Either way, it was definitely a person. Still couldn't make out details, but the outline was unmistakable. Shoulders, head. Maybe arms crossed in front. They were standing in the exact same place. That gave me pause. A whole day had passed. A real person wouldn't just be standing there, unmoving unless it wasn't a person. My brain started trying to make sense of it. A mannequin? Some kind of security decoy. But who would do that in an abandoned building? For what purpose? And why only in that window? I actually stepped back a little, into the street, just to get a better look. Cars honked. I ignored them. It didn't help. The glass was too dirty. Still, the figure didn't move. Not even a twitch. I stood there longer than I should have, just watching. Waiting for it to turn. to wave, to vanish. It didn't. Eventually I got cold, pulled my scarf up higher, and walked away, telling myself again it was probably nothing. Some forgotten piece of furniture catching the light at the right time. Or some squatters maybe, though no one I knew had seen anyone go in or out of that place in years. By the time I got to work, I'd mostly put it out of my head. But that night, as I brushed my teeth and stared at my own tired reflection, I realized something that made my skin prickle. I hadn't noticed it the first time I saw it. The building had always been there. I walked by it every day. That fifth-floor window had always just been empty. And now it wasn't. By the third day, it was already a ritual. I wouldn't have admitted that out loud. But I knew it was true. I woke up already anticipating the moment I'd pass that building. Not excited. Not scared exactly. Just drawn to it. Like some part of me had locked onto that window without my permission. I left my apartment a little earlier that morning. Just enough time to linger, if I needed to. The street was mostly empty. Commuters still inside, windows fogged up. That chill in the air that gets into your sleeves no matter how tightly you're wrapped. When I reached the building, I stopped. Same spot. Same window. Same shape. Only this time, I noticed something different. The light. The sun was behind me now, barely peeking through the row of apartment blocks. And as I looked up at the fifth floor, I realized the glass had a faint glare on it, just a shimmer of morning sun bouncing back. Except it wasn't consistent. Most of the windows reflected the same soft sheen. But not that one. The fifth-floor window, the one with the figure, was darker. Dimmer. Like the light didn't touch it properly. It wasn't just dirt. I was sure of that. It felt like the glass itself absorbed the sun, swallowing it, refusing to reflect. The shape inside was still there. Still unmoving. But my brain kept trying to fill in details, to force meaning onto the vague outline. Was it a man? A woman? Old? Young? I stepped closer to the gate, hands in my coat pockets, trying to peer up without being too obvious about it. Felt ridiculous. Like some creep scoping out an old building. But I couldn't stop. The figure looked straighter somehow. More upright than before. The shoulders were sharper, squared. It still hadn't moved. And yet something had changed. A car passed behind me, and I jumped slightly, heart in my throat. When I looked back up, nothing had moved. But the strangest part? For a second, I don't even know if it was real, I thought I saw a second shadow. Just a flicker. Like someone had been standing just behind the first figure, deeper in the room, and moved out of sight. Gone the moment I blinked. A trick of light, I told myself. But even as I walked away, I couldn't shake it. That window wasn't just hiding something. It was watching. That night, I dreamed of windows. Not in any vivid, nightmarish way, just rows and rows of them. Dark panes set into blank walls. Some broken, some covered in ice. But every one of them had something just barely visible behind the glass. Not moving. Just watching. I woke up tangled in sweat-damp sheets, my room too quiet, the air too still. I didn't tell anyone. It felt stupid to admit that an old building on Kelm Street was starting to take up space in my head. But I was beginning to feel it, that itch under the skin. The feeling you get when you sense a pattern forming, even if it doesn't make sense yet. The next morning, I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to look. I'd walk straight past that building like it was any other block of rotting concrete. No glances. No pauses. No more feeding the thing that was slowly growing in my brain. And for a while, it worked. I crossed the intersection with my eyes on the opposite sidewalk. I kept my hood up and earbuds in, determined to pretend the building didn't exist. I got about 15 feet past it before I stopped. You know that sensation you get when you realize someone's staring at you? That tightness between the shoulder blades? The way your skin reacts before your brain does? That. I froze, foot halfway off the curb, breath caught in my chest. Something was different. I turned. The window was empty. No silhouette. No figure. Just a blank, black square, reflecting nothing. The sight of it should have brought relief. But instead, something twisted in my gut. Because the absence felt wrong. Worse, even, than seeing it there. I stared up at the 5th floor for a long moment, heart thudding, waiting for it to reappear. It didn't. But something else did. In the 3rd window from the right, same floor, same row, I saw it. Just for a second. A flicker of motion. A shift. Like someone slipping out of view just as I looked up. It had moved. It moved. That idea stuck with me like a splinter, small, but impossible to ignore. I played the moment over and over in my head all day, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, or a bird passing by, or a curtain shifting in a draft. But it wasn't. I know what I saw. The window had changed. And the figure, whatever it was no longer where it had always been. By the time I got off work, the sky was already draining to gray. The sun was setting early, slipping behind buildings like it was in a hurry to disappear. I don't usually walk home. But that night, I didn't want to take the train. I wanted to see it again. Not out of curiosity. Not even fear, really. More like obligation. Like I'd started something I didn't know how to stop. Kelm Street felt emptier than usual. Not abandoned, just quiet. Cars passed with their headlights already on, but no music played from the open windows. No joggers, no dog walkers. Just the wind, threading through dead leaves and loose wires. When I reached the building, I stopped across the street and looked up. 5th floor. There it was again. The figure had returned to the leftmost window, but something was different. Its posture had shifted. Instead of facing forward, it was turned, slightly, subtly, angled toward the street. Toward me. I felt it immediately. That pressure. Like its attention was real. Focused. Intentional. I watched it for a full minute, maybe longer, until my hands started to go numb in my coat pockets. Then I noticed something else. The reflection. All the other windows mirrored the soft gold of the sunset. Warm light, dancing off cracked glass and rusted trim. But the window with the figure was wrong again. It didn't reflect the street, or the sun, or anything. Instead, the glass looked flat. Almost like a screen. And behind it, the figure was clearer than before. I could make out more definition, arms at its sides, the faint suggestion of a head tilted just enough to give the impression of awareness. I took a step closer to the building, drawn in before I realized it. And that's when I saw it. There was something on the inside of the glass. A handprint. Pressed from within. Just one. Faint. Greasy. The kind that's left when someone leans too close to see out. It hadn't been there before. That was the first time I felt it, real fear. Cold, unshakable, seeping under my skin. Because that handprint was at face level. And it was exactly the size of mine. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see the handprint. Smudged. Pale. Waiting. I told myself over and over it was just coincidence, that dozens of people could have left that mark over the years. Maybe it had always been there, and I just never noticed. But that didn't explain the figure. Or the way it angled its body toward me. The next morning, I left later than usual. Deliberately so. I didn't want to see it again. Or maybe I did, but only under different light. The early morning cold always had a way of distorting things. What I needed was clarity. The streets were busier by the time I reached Kelm. Kids waiting for buses. Workers with coffee cups. I figured maybe, with more people around, I'd feel less watched. But as I passed the building, I found myself slowing. Of course I looked up. And of course it was there. But now I could see it more clearly than ever before. It was standing closer to the glass. I could see the press of its shirt, or jacket maybe, flat against the window. I could see the outline of its shoulders, the faint hollow between the collarbones. Still no face, not exactly. The light behind it wasn't strong enough. But it was no longer a vague shape. It was a person. And it was definitely looking at me. No more ambiguity. No more maybe. I could feel the weight of that gaze like a hand on the back of my neck. I turned in place, slowly, pretending to check my phone, wanting to see if anyone else had noticed. But no one was looking. People walked past like the building didn't exist. One man even lit a cigarette just feet from the gate, didn't glance up once. A mother tugged her kid along the sidewalk without missing a beat. I waited for someone to pause. To look up. Nothing. It was just me. Just me and the thing in the window. I walked on quickly, pulse hammering in my ears, refusing to look back. But even as I turned the corner, I could still feel it. The certainty of its eyes. Following. I tried talking about it at work. It didn't go well. I waited until late afternoon, when things had quieted down and most people had retreated into their own little headphone bubbles. I leaned over to Pete, the guy in the next cubicle. We're not close, but we've swapped coffee runs and harmless gossip enough that it didn't feel weird. You ever walk down Kelm Street? I asked, keeping my voice casual. He looked up, blinking like I'd pulled him out of a trance. What? Yeah, sometimes. Why? There's that old building, the one with the chained-up front gate and all the broken windows. Pete squinted. The red one? Used to be red, I said. 5 floors. Looks like a dorm or an old apartment block. He nodded slowly. I know it. Creepy as hell. Why? Have you ever seen anyone inside? He hesitated for a second. It's boarded up, isn't it? Most of it. But one of the windows on the top floor is still open. Like, not broken, just clear. There's someone who stands there. Like, every morning. Just staring out. Pete chuckled. You sure it's not your reflection? No, I said too quickly. It's not that. It's always there. Same window. And I think. I stopped, suddenly unsure how much I wanted to say. Pete gave me a look that was somewhere between concerned and amused. Maybe it's a squatter. Maybe. But even he didn't sound convinced. He turned back to his screen, and the conversation ended there. But the way he'd said it, squatter, like that explained something. It stuck with me. Because that figure wasn't behaving like someone squatting. They weren't hiding. Or ducking out of sight. They wanted to be seen. And more than that, they were choosing me. The next few days were a blur of avoidance. I tried different routes to work. Took the bus once. Ubered another time. Even tried cutting through the park and looping 2 blocks around just to skip Kelm Street altogether. It felt dumb and paranoid, like I was letting something invisible dictate my life. But I also knew I couldn't take many more mornings of that feeling. The watching. But here's the thing, even when I didn't pass the building, I couldn't shake the sense of it. The pressure behind me. The weight of a gaze I couldn't see. I started catching movement in the corners of mirrors, or shadows that didn't line up with anything around them. At one point, I saw someone standing behind me in the reflection of a coffee shop window, just a brief silhouette. When I turned around, the sidewalk was empty. That night, I stood in my apartment with all the lights on, blinds drawn. I live on the 3rd floor, not high enough to see across the city, but enough to overlook the alley behind my building. And for the first time in months, I really looked out. Nothing. Just dumpsters. Fire escapes. One of those old sodium streetlights throwing rust-colored light onto the pavement. Still, I didn't sleep. Not really. I kept thinking of that figure in the window. The way it had moved. The handprint. The shift in its posture. It wasn't just standing there anymore. It was tracking me. The next morning I caved. I took the usual route again, straight down Kelm. I told myself it was just to prove something. That it wouldn't be there. That all of this was just a build-up in my own head. But as I approached the building, I already knew I was wrong. I felt it before I saw it. And when I looked up, God! It wasn't in the left window anymore. It had moved to the middle. Same floor. Same distance from the glass. but now dead center. Facing forward. Facing me. And this time, there was no question. It was staring directly at my face. I stood there for a long time. It felt like the street around me had gone silent. No cars. No footsteps. Just wind curling between the buildings and that presence. It was clearer than ever. The figure. Still indistinct in the way that all things behind glass are, but now undeniably human. Too human. There was no curtain behind it. No furniture. No movement inside the room, just a figure, centered in the window like it was framed on purpose. I could almost make out the slope of its head now. A thin shadow where its eyes should have been. I took a step backward onto the curb. The sound of a distant horn broke the spell for a second. I turned my head and spotted a man walking his dog a little further down the block, heading my way. Middle-aged, jogging shoes, windbreaker. As he neared me, I pointed up without thinking. "Hey, sorry, weird question, but do you see that? In the window? 5th floor?" He looked at me, then followed my finger. Squinted. Paused. Then shrugged. "Nah. I don't see anything." I blinked. "You don't? There's someone standing, right there, in the center window." He looked again, longer this time. "Nope. Looks empty to me." He gave me a kind of polite, dismissive smile. The kind you give someone talking to themselves in a grocery store. Then he kept walking. I turned back toward the building, heart thudding harder now. The figure hadn't moved. But something inside me had. Because it wasn't just about being watched anymore. It was the realization that no one else could see it. That window, the 5th floor center frame, it was for me. And me alone. I stopped walking. Just stood there, mouth dry, staring up at the thing in the window while the city churned around me like white noise. It didn't move. But that made it worse. Somehow more deliberate. Like it didn't need to move to make its presence known. Like stillness was its way of announcing itself. I pulled out my phone. Tried to take a picture. Maybe show someone later, make them believe I wasn't losing it. I zoomed in on the 5th floor and tapped the screen to focus. The camera struggled. Everything around the window was crisp. The bricks, the rusted ledges, even the cracks in the concrete. But the window itself? Blurry. Like my phone couldn't decide what it was seeing. The center warped and unfocused. The figure? Just a smear of gray. I tried again. Same result. It wouldn't let me capture it. And that, more than anything, told me it was real. I lowered the phone and looked up again. And the figure was gone. My heart thudded once, hard. My eyes darted across the row of windows. All of them empty. Just glass and shadow. I stood there, disoriented, suddenly aware of my breathing. Then, as I turned to leave, something in my peripheral vision moved. I snapped my head back up just in time to see it. The figure. It was in a new window now. Far right side. But closer to the glass. Shoulders raised. Posture tense. And this time, I saw something else. The head moved. Only slightly. Just a tilt. A subtle shift. Like it was studying me. Or worse, acknowledging me. Like a person nodding across a room. A single, deliberate gesture that said, "I see you." And then it was still again. I didn't sleep that night. Not even in fits or starts. I lay in bed with my eyes open, the ceiling a blur above me, my heart pacing like it was preparing for something. Every creak of the radiator, every gust of wind outside my window made me flinch. By 3 a.m, I'd made the decision. I had to go in. Not out of bravery. Not out of some need to prove I wasn't crazy. It was simpler than that. I couldn't take the not knowing anymore. I needed to see what was behind that glass. What was casting the shadow? What was waiting? The building had always been sealed from the front. Big rusted chain. Deadbolt gate. But old places like that have a dozen forgotten entries. Broken fire doors, busted latches on loading docks, basement windows nobody bothered to fix. I'd grown up around enough rundown buildings to know. I waited until dusk the next day. Didn't go to work. Didn't answer my phone. I just walked the block a few times until I was sure no one was watching. Then I slipped around the back. There was a side alley half choked with vines and broken pallets. A rusted dumpster. I found a metal maintenance door tucked behind it, half hidden in shadow. One of the hinges had peeled away from the wall. The frame looked warped, like someone had kicked it in years ago, and no one cared enough to fix it. I pulled. It groaned like it hadn't been touched in decades. Inside, blackness. Thick, stagnant air. That smell of wet rot and cold metal. A stairwell leading up, steep and narrow, with peeling paint curling like dead skin from the walls. No lights. No graffiti. No rats even. Just the echo of my own breath bouncing off concrete. I climbed slowly. Each step creaked under my weight like it was remembering the last person who walked them. The 5th floor felt impossibly far away, like the higher I went, the less space meant anything. When I finally reached the top landing, I paused. The hallway was narrow. Carpetless. The walls were a blotchy, discolored green. Doors lined both sides, each one shut, some warped from moisture. Room numbers had faded or fallen off entirely. Except one. 5C. The number was perfectly intact. The door slightly ajar. The only one open on the whole floor. I stood in front of 5C for a long time, afraid to touch the door. Not because I thought something would jump out, this wasn't a horror movie. But because opening it would make all of this real. The weeks of unease, the figure in the window, the shifting shadows. If I crossed that threshold, I wouldn't be able to explain it away anymore. No tricks of the light. No sleep deprivation. No bad dreams. Just truth. The air up there was colder. Not just in temperature, hollow, like nothing had breathed it in years. My fingers hovered over the door's edge. It was open maybe an inch, just enough for the darkness inside to bleed out. I pushed gently. It swung inward with a long, drawn-out creak. The room was still. No furniture. No rugs. Just bare floorboards and a thick layer of dust so undisturbed it felt disrespectful to step on. The only light came from the window. 5th floor, facing the street. It was clearer now. The glass was intact, but something about it felt wrong. Too clean. Like it didn't belong in a place like this. There were no lights, but enough of the evening sun filtered in to let me see the basics. The room was mostly empty. Except for one thing. In the far corner, half covered by shadow, lay an old wooden chair. Facing the window. And on the floor next to it, almost perfectly centered on one of the warped planks, sat an object. Small. Innocuous. A disposable camera. I stared at it for what felt like a full minute before stepping inside. Each footstep echoed too loud, too sharp. I knelt slowly beside the camera and picked it up. Dust clung to the grip, but the lens was clear. And when I turned it over, I felt something catch in my throat. There was a strip of faded masking tape on the back. And written in shaky block letters. For whoever sees him. I held that camera like it might burn me. For whoever sees him. Not if. Whoever. The room felt smaller now. Like the walls had drawn a few inches closer. I turned in place, heart thudding, trying to convince myself I hadn't just walked into something I couldn't walk out of. But the space was empty. No closets. No doors. Just the single window, and the chair. A layer of dust so untouched it might as well have been undisturbed snow, except for where I had stepped. And the path in front of the chair. That spot had been cleared. Something, or someone, had stood there. For a long time. Enough to leave a perfect, clean outline of 2 feet in the dust. I crouched and lined up the viewfinder with the window. From this spot I could see the street below, exactly where I usually stood. This was the angle. This was where the figure had been standing. Day after day. Looking down. Looking at me. I raised the camera and took a picture of the window. Click. Whir. That old sound, mechanical and tactile, like something you can't fake with phones or filters. Then I turned and looked back toward the rest of the room. Still nothing. Just the silence, and that strange, frozen air. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted behind me. Not a noise. Not a shadow. Just a tension in the air. Like the moment before a thunderclap. I raised the camera again, without thinking, and snapped a photo toward the empty corner of the room. Flash. The light bloomed harsh and sudden in the dim space, bleaching everything for a split second. And in that moment, just as the light faded, I saw something move. Not in the corner. In the reflection on the glass. A shape. Behind me. I spun around. The room was empty. Totally, unmistakably empty. But I knew I had seen something. In the glass? A shape, just a shade darker than the shadows. Positioned where no light should have cast one. It hadn't looked like a man. Not quite. Too still. Too tall. I backed away from the window, camera clutched tight, breath shallow. My fingers shook as I pulled it up again and took another picture, this time directly at the spot where the reflection had been. Flash. Nothing changed. Still silence. Still dust. But now there was this growing, horrible certainty swelling in my chest. I wasn't alone anymore. I didn't even check the camera. Didn't need to. The air had turned. Colder. Fuller. Like the room had begun to hold its breath with me. I backed toward the hallway, each step feeling heavier, slower, like the floor was turning against me. I glanced at the door to 5C, still open, waiting, as if it had always been waiting for me to leave the way I came. But as I crossed the threshold, I heard it. A whisper. Right beside my ear. Not a word. Not even a breath. Just presence. The kind of sound you don't hear with your ears but feel in your spine. I didn't turn. I didn't have to. Because I already knew what it was. It had always been there. In the window. In the wall. In the reflection. Waiting to be seen. I ran. Down the stairs, past the peeling walls and the cold, blind corners. My legs barely worked. I stumbled into the alley and didn't stop moving until I hit a block with cars and lights and sound again. Only then did I breathe. Only then did I look at the camera. Still dusty. Still intact. I pressed the little rewind lever. It clicked. Word. Locked. The roll was finished. One set of photos. The last thing left to do was develop them. I found a place downtown that still developed film. A tiny shop tucked between a pawn shop and a vape store, run by a guy who looked like he hadn't changed his clothes in 3 days. He didn't ask questions when I handed over the disposable. Just looked at the label on the tape, for whoever sees him, then at me. "You want prints or digital?" he asked. "Both," I said. "Please." He nodded, didn't comment on the urgency in my voice. Said it would take a few hours. I walked around in a daze. Sat in a diner with cold coffee and barely touched food. Every reflection I passed, shop windows, parked cars, phone screens, made me flinch. I didn't look up. Didn't want to know if the figure had followed me from the building, somehow hidden in the rooftop lines. When I returned, the photos were in a plain white envelope. No fanfare. No warnings. The guy behind the counter handed them over like they were just another errand. But his eyes lingered. "I looked at M," he said softly. I swallowed. "And?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know what the hell that is. But I wish I hadn't seen it." I didn't ask anything else. I took the photos home. Sat on the floor of my living room. Lights on. Curtains shut. The first few shots were what you'd expect. Dusty floorboards. Peeling walls. The old wooden chair. Then, one photo of the window. From behind. Just the street far below. The place I always stood. Then the one I'd taken over my shoulder. Toward the corner. That's where it changed. Because in that photo, just barely visible in the grain and the flare of the flash. There was something. A figure. Thin. Elongated. Leaning ever so slightly from the wall, as if caught mid-step. No face. No details. Just presence. Then the final photo. The one I'd taken after I turned around. And in that one, it was standing right behind me. Inches from the back of my head. Towering. Its hand just beginning to reach forward. I dropped the photo. Covered my mouth. And in that moment I knew. It had seen me. Truly seen me. Not just from the window, but inside. Through me. It had let me into that room. Let me take its picture. Because that's how it spreads. It starts with the watching. And ends with the replacing. I haven't gone back to Kelm Street. Don't need to. Because a few days later, I noticed something out my own apartment window. A faint shape, 5 stories up, in the building across the alley. Facing me. Every night, a little closer to the glass. And tonight it's just standing there. Still. Silent. Watching. And I know, deep down, without needing to check, someone else is walking past the old dorm on Kelm Street. And for the first time, the window is empty.